Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphanlast, aka Skylar Madison, and today we are focusing on the subscriber drawing request series, where I ask you guys what you want me to draw next. You guys submit a series of ideas. I look for the ones that I like, and then I allow you guys to vote in a poll on Twitter to decide what it is that I'm going to draw next. And so you guys decided it would be a warrior mouse, and I decided, well, if it's going to be a warrior mouse, then it should be a sci-fi warrior mouse, because in the last video I kind of went a little bit overboard criticizing fantasy, because I just don't, I don't know, I've never read a fantasy book. Well, no, I read one fantasy book that I enjoyed. Actually, it was from J.R.R. Tolkien. Actually, it was the Hobbit. I enjoyed that, the way that it was written. The narrative line, the way it sounded like, kind of like a poem or a nursery rhyme throughout the entire thing. I really enjoyed that, and then I tried to read Lord of the Rings, and it just didn't work out for me. The wrong writing style, even though it was the same author. That was pretty disappointing. But that's something for another time. So, you know, I started working on this image, and I decided, you know, there's a number of things about the line work that I don't like what I did in the previous video. Some of it literally made no sense, and some of it literally looked pretty terrible, like what I'm working on right there. Some of it I completely got rid of it and fixed it. I don't know, I don't like having things that don't make sense in the physical world, and I don't like having garbage. So here I started looking for a few more references for mice, but then I just thought, well, maybe a video would be better. And I found a mouse that was kind of at a moment where its head was turned in a pose that was more like what I was looking for, but every time that the mouse would get in the pose, it was either moving too fast or too far away from the camera to be in focus. And I watched this video for probably about 15 minutes with no like voiceover at all. Nothing like the National Geographic where there's some voiceover of some British guy going, and then the mouse comes out of his little habitat as he eats the nuts and is wary of the bird that is competing to eat the nuts. Nothing like that. So that's my horrible British accent. But anyways, yeah, I never really quite got what I needed. And when I say that I was watching it for about 15 minutes, what that means is I put the video in slow motion, and I watched about 15 minutes of the video's 15 minutes, not 15 minutes of real time or anything like that. Like, I was sitting there watching that video for forever, and there just came a point where I realized, okay, well, I got a screen capture early on, but it was blurry, and there's never going to be a point where I'm going to watch this video, even if I watch it all the way through, where I'm going to wind up with, you know, a clear image of the mouse in the pose that I actually want. So here you see me kind of sketching out the warrior mouse, kind of using these blue lines. Now I'm using a black color, but I turned off the blue alpha, which makes the entire image turn blue whenever I use black, and so that's what I'm using. I'm using a layer that's just got its alpha kind of altered, and most of what I'm doing with the blue lines is just lining out the anatomy. I kind of got the rib cage in there, I got the spine, I got kind of a roughed up idea of what the what's going on with the hips. I got, you know, the radius and ulna and a bunch of other bones lined out, and kind of, you know, not very many muscles, because like I'm more concerned about the shape, the overall shape, because this is a mouse that's wearing armor. It's not like he's going to be, you know, showing off his muscles. So I'm not really too concerned about like lining out a whole bunch of muscles and such like that. But I think it's coming out good. I don't know if I really succeeded in making a mouse that looks like he's looking away from the camera. I don't know. I might just kind of adjust his eyeball and adjust the length of his nose, his nozzle, in order to get a good idea as to like making a mouse that's looking away from the camera. Now, you saw me looking at Patrick Brown's artwork. He's an artist that I kind of admire. Every once in a while, I look at his work just to kind of get inspired, not just with something like style or anything like that, but also just, you know, he's got an interesting way of drawing something like hair or like an expression on someone's face. And usually the expressions on his characters are a little bit larger than life, and that's something that I really appreciate about his work. It's just really obnoxious and really appealing, actually. Now, I decided inside of the reference image that's on the screen right now, just kind of right above the warrior mouse there, there's like this weird shoulder guard, and I thought, well, if I could kind of make a hybrid of that and kind of make it kind of look like something that comes from, I don't know, Metroid, that'd be kind of cool. And now, I used to draw sci-fi armor quite a bit as a kid, and so like I have an idea as to what I'm going for here, and like I'm already familiar with like making at least armor look sci-fi. For some reason, I've never really mastered making guns look sci-fi, but like, I don't know. You tell me if I succeeded by the end of the video, because here I use a Blade Runner. I think this is the newer model of the Blade Runner gun, and I used it as a reference, and I don't know. I came up with something like a completely different gun by the time that it was all said and done. You tell me if I made it look good. Now, I'm not really quite sure if... One of the difficult things when you're drawing a character that's holding something is making it actually look like the character is holding it. And making sure that the object that's being held not only looks like it's being held, but looks like it's being held within the physical world that actually exists. Because it's easy to get, you know, a particular angle going on with the hand, and then get a completely different, like, or slightly different angle going on with the gun in this case. And not only that, you know, the handle to a gun, it's not quite as obnoxious as a 45-degree angle, but it's definitely not a 90-degree angle from the actual barrel of the gun. And so that's, you know, getting that angle correct is really difficult. And you'll see me work on that a little bit more. Now here, I not only wanted to know a 90-degree angle for the fisheye perspective that I was creating here, but I needed to know the halfway point. So I made a circle that's bigger than halfway, and I lined up the edge of the circle, the ellipse, to the edge. And then I moved that same circle's assistant to the other very edge and centered it on the line of the fisheye perspective guide that I got there, the fisheye perspective assistant. And I draw another circle, and right where they intersect, that not only tells me 90 degrees, but it also tells me halfway. Now, you may feel as though, oh, well, you told me this last video. I told you something similar last video. Geometry is one of those things that you need to actually listen really carefully to, because there's a lot of different operations that have a very similar workflow, but they show you different information. I showed you something similar last video. I didn't show you that last video. Okay, what I showed you last video was how to get a 90-degree angle off of an object. This video, I showed you how to not only get 90-degree angle off of an object, but also how to find the midway point, halfway. This makes it so that you don't have to measure things with a ruler or anything like that, whether it's a physical ruler or a software ruler in the tools panel of a piece of software. So I'd like, personally, if I don't need to use a ruler, I don't want to use one, because when you're drawing something, at least from my perspective, if you could figure it out with geometry, it's probably going to be more accurate with geometry. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not like some master at geometry or anything like that, but I know enough to kind of, figure things out a little bit, that sort of thing. And so, you saw me add a few things in the last minute with the line work while I'm inking this thing. If I was inking someone else's line work, in all probability, their line work would be a little bit more, actually a heck of a lot more finished and polished than mine. So there would be absolutely no refinements and decision making as big as some of the things that I'm deciding while I'm inking this, because when I'm working on my own work, I know exactly what I want when I'm making it. I know, oh yeah, you know what, this would look really good, and so I left my line work as pretty much a sketch, and so that allows me to kind of ink it and make it look exactly the way that I want during the inking process. And inking is a heck of a lot easier on the computer than it is on pencil and paper. You don't want to be making last-minute decisions inking something on pencil and paper. And here I am just kind of making the hand. Here's the butt of the gun. I used the spline assistant. I don't really use the spline very often, but in that specific case, since I've taken the time to literally scribble on Krita and play around with the tools, I knew exactly how to use the spline. There are times when they ask me, oh, what type of assistant were you using there, or something like that, or what tool were you using there? And sometimes I just think, well, I don't know, haven't you just kind of played around with the program a little bit? Just, you just kind of scribble around and spend like 10 minutes every once in a while just kind of exploring parts of the program, and you'll find it. It's not that big of a deal, but of course, when it's on the screen, I'll explain what it is that I'm doing. Now here you see me kind of doing some more refinements. Now I wind up actually pulling out some assistant tools. Now with this specific gun, I didn't see any reason to actually use a vanishing point. I decided to use two parallel rulers, and that's about it. There wasn't any need for me to use much else, if I'm recalling correctly. Of course, if I use a different assistant in that process, then I'll let you know and explain what it is that I was using. But yeah, like right now I'm not using any assistant. It's all freehand at this moment. But there does come a point where I'm just thinking, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to, I have no idea, because you don't want your line work to kind of start contradicting itself and have an object that follows like three different perspective positions. Now, see here, I realized, oh dang, that's like not even a 90-degree angle to the the stock of the gun. So I need to actually create a situation where it's like something more than a 90-degree angle, just a little bit more. And so I move things around a little bit. Now, in the last video, I said you don't want to use the transformation tools on finished product. Now, you can use the transformation tool if all that you're really doing is like moving the object around or rotating it. things like that, because you're not actually really altering the pixels. If you're like really doing anything else, like resizing it or warping it in some way on Krita, you don't want to do it. On Photoshop, sure, go ahead. Of course, you still have to worry about some of the same thing, like on Photoshop even, you start using the warp tool, and sometimes you're going to wind up losing resolution and such like that. But on Krita, for some reason, I noticed it's really bad. You lose a lot of resolution when you use the transformation tools, when you're actually transforming with the transformation tools. And so I try not to use them. Now, I do actually use them in this video, but it's only for something very small, and I didn't want to really overuse it. That's the thing. You don't want to overuse something, because when you print something out from being digital, actually not even the last thing, it's not even on the list of things that you want to have happen. You don't want to have a situation where it prints out, everything looks good, except there's some random pixels that, like, random noisy pixels here and there. So that's why you want to avoid using the hardcore transformation capabilities of Krita. Now, I really wish that some of these transformation tools worked for vector, and I wish that you could actually, convert raster line work into vector work, so that you could use the transformation tools however way that you want, and then, reconvert them to being a raster level. Now, you can convert vector to raster, but that's not a big deal. The thing is like, it just seems like, I don't know, I do get pretty frustrated, because, like, the warp tool is nearly worthless inside of Krita. The amount, and it's not just the amount that Krita winds up, like, not really being able to conform to the shape of objects, but the warping capabilities not only do that, but they make you lose resolution. And so it's those two things combined that make the warp tool inside of, or the warp capabilities inside of the transformation tool, kind of useless inside of Krita. So there are times when I legitimately, like, talk up Krita. Great job, did a great job, this is awesome, this is better than Photoshop, and I genuinely mean it when I say it. And yet there are still times when, there are things inside of Krita that really do need some work. I even still in this video, I wound up using the I found that okay, so in the last video I had difficulty with the ellipse tool. It wasn't working properly. Now, I found that the concentric ellipse has more of a likelihood of not working properly, especially when you need an assistant that's pretty small. But even still, with the normal ellipse tool, or normal ellipse assistant, it winds up getting wonky eventually. But you'll see it. There comes a point when I finish this leg where I pull out the assistant tool with the ellipses, and things don't work very well. So I just I find different little workarounds. Some of those workarounds are using the assistant anyways, but I wish that Krita, I love the assistants inside of Krita. I've never seen a program have better assistants in that they have more capabilities than any other program I've ever seen. But their reliability sometimes kind of becomes kind of a coin toss, where you don't know if you're going to be able to make an ellipse this small or something like that. And that can be pretty frustrating. The experience before you even use the assistant, you kind of think to yourself, I don't know if this is going to work, and all that. I don't know if you guys saw it, but there was like one frame on the screen there for a brief moment where you saw Kung Fury on the screen. Now, I recently discovered Kung Fury. It's one of the greatest films of all time. Of course, it's one of those movies. It's like intentionally bad. Like they intentionally made the movie terrible, and yet it's hilarious. Like every moment of it, that movie is hilarious, and you can find it on YouTube. Just go onto YouTube, type in Kung Fury, and there's a 30-minute long movie. Totally worth watching. I watched it. I loved it. Tears were streaming out of my eyes during specific moments because it was hilarious. Gold, like second greatest movie of all time. First greatest movie of all time was Blade Runner 2049, in my opinion. But anyways, yeah. So this is a weird moment because now that I've already established what the armor looks like on the leg, I was now, instead of using my reference images, I was using the other leg as a reference. And so I kept having to kind of redraw things and kind of try to conceptualize, okay, what would this leg look like from this angle? And so I kind of just had to work it out and just keep at it. Don't give up. Make it look right. Now, you know, one of the questions that I keep getting is just generally, like I talked about perspective last video, but in this video, like, just how do you draw? How do you draw? And the thing is I think that a lot of people, a lot of new artists out there, I think that what they're looking for is like a step-by-step guide, like how to cook. Okay, even cooking though is an art form, but more than that, they're looking for a step-by-step guide, like you would find with something like math. Okay, so you read a math book, and you're going to know how to actually solve the math problems. And yeah, artwork doesn't work like that at all. It, like, there isn't, like, I can go ahead and give you an answer, and it, like, someone who is an artist that I greatly admire can give me answers to questions that I have about artwork. And there will be times where his advice will not work for me. It's not like some formulaic sort of algorithm that people can share. What you need to do in order to get better is you just need to keep doing it. Okay? Which means you have to draw a lot of drawings that really suck. You're going to have to... See, this is when I pull out the ellipse tool. I don't know if it's a concentric ellipse or not, but there comes a point where it gets so bad, I mean, it's completely worthless. I just wound up freehanding it, and it doesn't look as good as if an assistant tool just worked from the very get-go. So, I don't know. If any Krita developers are listening, please figure this out. Like, please make the assistant tools instead of Krita a little bit more reliable. But anyways, like, yeah, if you're learning how to draw and such like that, draw as best as you possibly can and just keep doing it. And if your drawings look terrible, just keep doing it. It doesn't matter, just keep doing it until you wind up liking some of your images. Like, eventually I'm going to go ahead and show you guys some of my first drawings that I ever drew. And you guys will be able to see that some of them are terrible. Actually, all of them are terrible. The drawings that I ever drew. And it doesn't matter how old you are. If you start drawing and your first drawings look like complete and total crap, like a 2-year-old drew them, then you're on the right track. That's the way it's just going to look. If you just barely started drawing, your artwork will look like a 2-year-old's, unless you're some sort of savant. Okay, there are some people out there that have never drawn a single picture in their life, and then they something shifts in their brain. They see a bunch of artwork or something, and they're like, I would love to be able to do that. And they start drawing, and somehow it winds up looking great. Now, normally those sorts of people, though, those types of people, they have already, they naturally observe things. They're making observations about reality that most people don't make. They're constantly thinking about how things are shaped in some way or how they look. And so those sorts of savant type people, they already have some sort of visual library in their brain as to how things look. Like right now on the screen, I don't have a reference. I'm just working with a visual library of what a gun looks like. Like Milt Kahl, okay, one of the greatest animators of all time. One of the things that he says is try to, in order to use a reference, just study the reference so that when you're actually drawing, you don't actually need to use the reference anymore. Now, not everybody has that sort of time. If I was animating an entire cartoon, I think I would spend some time studying a reference long enough to memorize everything that I needed to know about it in every single possible way so that I wouldn't have to keep looking back and forth to my reference and back to what I'm working on. But that's the thing. The gun here didn't work out for multiple reasons as a visual library. One, I've never really spent that much time sitting there staring at a gun. And two, even if I had, that wouldn't necessarily make it look like a sci-fi gun, if that makes sense. So, when people are drawing from memory, it's because they've either drawn that thing a million times or drawn something similar to it enough times to know what that looks like. And then, there's the other people who just simply have studied enough things to where they don't need to look at a reference. They just kind of draw it. Now, it does look weird when somebody who's building up their visual library, when they're at some place like a shopping mall, and they see something that interests them, or inside of a gun shop or something, and they're just staring. And, the salesman's like, hey, you interested in something? No, I'm just looking. And you just keep staring at it. Well, you seem to keep looking at this. No, I'm just looking. Yeah, but this gun, blah, 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 and you're just looking at it. It does get a little frustrating at times, but, we live in a just 10 years ago, things were, nowadays, if you want to build up your visual library, it's a lot easier. You can look at Google Images and just kind of study and look at it and just noticing, okay, so this portion of it extrudes in this sort of way, this portion of it is kind of shaped like a bean or what have you, or a cylinder or a circle or a sphere or what have you, and you're able to just kind of look at it. It does really help if you're able to actually hold the object that you're studying and rotate it. Or video. Video is always useful. I used video in this video. So, all of that definitely helps. Definitely helps you. All of that definitely helps you. So, here I am drawing the snake out. And so, once again, I'm using the blue lines as a means to line out anatomy. And once I start using here I'm just kind of thinking, okay, I want it to be a sci-fi snake. So how does a snake become sci-fi? This is something that kept popping in my head quite a bit. Like, take the mouse, for example. The mouse has been anthropomorphized. It has some human anatomy. Like, I decided not to put a tail on it, for example. And, it stands on he stands on two legs and has two hands with opposable thumbs. But a snake, okay, a sci-fi snake, how would a snake become technologically advanced enough to independently, do its thing, to get technological, to explore space or something like that? How would that work out? And I thought, well, it would be interesting if it managed to have some sort of telekinetic capabilities where it can actually pick up objects and manipulate them with its mind. Under that specific situation, it wouldn't need arms, and it wouldn't need hands, and it wouldn't need opposable thumbs. So here with the red lines, I'm detailing, what the armor is going to look like. Now, there was a couple of decisions that I made with this that I wound up refining even further later on down the road. See, when an object winds up being foreshortened and such, then in that specific situation, if you have a bunch of sheets of armor or something, those sheets of armor will look like they're congested closer together than when you're looking at them at a profile view. And so it's not like different sheets of armor are different lengths. Every single sheet of armor is supposed to be the same length. It's just once the body of the snake starts to point away from the viewer, the sheets of armor wind up being closer and closer and closer together. It winds up looking like they're closer and closer together, not that they actually physically are. Now let's go back to talking about the visual library, for example. Take Kim Jong-gi, or Kim Jong-gi, whatever. I think it's Kim Jong-gi is how you pronounce his name. This guy, in my opinion, is the modern day Michelangelo. This guy is the dude that is basically he goes over to a piece of paper, whether it's a gigantic canvas or what have you, and he's able to draw an entire scene, the entire background, all the characters, without a single guideline. Like, he'll have, like, just straight up ink directly to paper throughout the entire process. Not a single flaw with the entire image. And he's made picture after picture after picture that just looks amazing. Just absolutely amazing. And not a single fault with his entire process. And he says the exact same thing. Basically, just study your references enough to the point to where you don't need the reference anymore. And, although that's great if you're a commercial artist and someone's going to pay you a couple, $1,000 just for one picture, or a couple $100,000, or maybe $1 million for a picture, well, guess what? That's awesome. Like, you have the time to sit down and study that for hours and hours and hours and hours. But for the rest of us, especially those of us that are just wanting to just sit down and just, draw immediately, that's the thing. A lot of us, we want to just sit down and just start drawing. We want that, if that's what you want to do, just to sit down and start drawing and not have a lot of prep work. Even just getting the reference images for some people, including me, is a lot of work, and it's something that we don't really want to do. Well, if you're like me in a lot of situations, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to look at that reference while you're actually drawing. And that's just the way it is. And after you've drawn that object a couple of times, at that point, yeah, that's when you have it permanently instilled in your visual library. However, if you wind up drawing that same thing in the same pose, the same position every single time, you have no idea what it looks like from every other angle. So you're no closer to having that adopted into your visual library than you were than the first time that you drew that specific item, if that makes sense. So you need to switch it up. You just keep on switching it up. Switch up the angle of the object that you're drawing, even if it's like the 5th time that you've drawn it and such. Every single time, just change the angle. After you do that enough times, and it's the same object that you've drawn each time, it's at that point you're going to notice that things are going to start coming together. Things are going to start looking as if you're able to draw things without really having a reference every single time. And that's really useful. But it's not going to be like that with everything. There's never going to be any point in time where something you've never studied ever before, you're just going to be able to draw it perfectly. There are occasions where I sit down and I've never drawn something specific, but I've studied it before in the past. I've taken the time to multiple occasions to just kind of sit down and look at something, and I've been able to draw it just from memory. That happens with no problem at all. However, if I've never even studied it, that thing's going to come out looking like crap. It won't quite look like being on the same level as something like the stuff that you would expect from a 2-year-old or anything like that, but it just won't look right. Something will be unsettling about it. People will look at it and be like, I know what that's supposed to be, but it looks nothing like that. That looks terrible. It is basically what'll happen if I draw something without a reference and without it being in my visual memory at all. So that's something to note. And so how do you know what to add into your visual library? Well, anything you find interesting that you're currently looking at in the physical world, most especially, that's what you should be adding into your visual library. Especially if you have plenty of time on your hands, or you're with some friends and, they're all talking about something that completely bores you, which happens 99% of the time, most of the time. For me, most people's conversations are completely pointless to me. I don't know. That's just me. Or like a pair of scissors, everyday objects. Just look at them, study them, look at them. Just try to figure out what makes them what they are. Sometimes taking objects apart can even help out. Like, I've taken apart a pair of scissors, and that was pretty educational. I could definitely draw a pair of scissors just simply based off of that alone. And, most people don't think that a pair of scissors would be difficult, but they actually are. I've seen people try to draw a pair of scissors without them being added into their visual library, and it totally looks off. Anyway, so here's the thumbnail. This is the before image. The image that I started in the last video. Of course, I drew out the background in the last video, but this is... I want to kind of show you the dramatic difference from this to the final line work and everything afterwards at the end of this video. And what I have to do next is add values, and then I'm going to add color after that. Okay, so this is going to be a grayscaled image. Anyways, guys, if you guys have any suggestions for what I should be drawing in the next, when I'm next finished drawing this image, finished doing this, I still have a couple more videos to go, but if you have any suggestions, feel free to leave a comment in the video description below that supplies feedback as to what you want me to draw next in this series. Try to steer away from anything that's copywritten, and, if it's funny, I'll laugh, but I probably won't draw it. Anyways, guys, if you guys enjoyed this video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like it, please like, share, and subscribe anyways. And if you'd like to take a look at any of my other videos, feel free to click on any of them that are appearing on the screen right now. And thank you very much for your time.